Hello, I am here today to review The Waves by Virginia Woolf. This is my fifth book by Virginia Woolf. It was published in 1931. It's considered Virginia Woolf's most experimental novel. I also read on Wikipedia that it sort of has a cult following, and a lot of people consider it kind of the rival to The Lighthouse to be Virginia Woolf's masterpiece. So I thought that was interesting. So this novel is divided into 9 sections, each of which follows the main characters at a different point in their lives. So it starts when they're young children and it ends when they're in old age. At the beginning of each section, there is kind of a 2 or 3 page prose poem where Virginia Woolf basically creates images around the ocean and the waves and a house near just off the coast and also birds and trees. And basically, I think these prose poems are supposed to mirror what's happening to the characters throughout the novel. Um, so there are 6 main characters here, 3 men and 3 women, named Bernard, Louis, and Neville. Those are the men, and the women are named Susan, Ginny, and Rhoda. And there is also a 7th character whom we never meet, but we learn a lot about from the other characters because they're all very close to him. So this entire novel is told through the internal monologues of 6 main characters. So there's no actual narration. You know, a section will just open with Bernard said, and then we'll get several paragraphs of what Bernard was thinking at a certain point in his life. And then we'll get Rhoda thought what or the Rhoda said, and then several paragraphs of what Rhoda thought. The plot in this book is not really important. In fact, I would say that this might be the first actually plotless novel I've ever read. Everything that actually, all the events of the novel are, we kind of find them out in passing almost. They're almost kind of told in these throwaway sentences in the middle of these internal monologues. So what happens is not important. What's important is the way that the characters think and feel about it and how they react to things. I think at its heart, this novel is about the search for meaning, the fact that we all want to have some kind of concrete meaning to our lives and to the universe, and how each of us looks for that meaning in a different place, and how where we find meaning affects our happiness, and also all of this happening, especially in light of the fact that we are all going to die, and the fact that ultimately we live in a meaningless universe. Because very early in this novel, Virginia Woolf establishes that none of the characters believe in religion, so they need to find meaning somewhere else. Some of the characters search for meaning in hedonism and material gain. Some of them search for it in raising a family, in nature. But the most thoroughly explored method of finding meaning, the one that Virginia Woolf is probably biased in favor of, since it's what she spent her life doing, is writing. A few of the characters in this novel take up writing as a career. One of them kind of dabbles in writing a little bit, and then it falls by the wayside as his other profession takes over. But the characters who do pursue writing seem to find it fulfilling, but at the same time struggle with the fact that when you write stories, especially, like, you're ultimately forcing meaning onto life when it's not there. You know, life doesn't happen with a rising action, a climax, or a resolution or anything. Life just kind of happens as it happens at its own pace. Um, and that's interesting also, just sort of in a meta way, because it's sort of a commentary on this novel, because I think basically what Virginia Woolf tried to do was write a novel about the entirety of life, about the way life actually happens, which is why it's in the 9 sections and why there's really no plot, because life doesn't have a plot. So that's interesting. this struggle that the writers in the novel have kind of leads into this idea that Virginia Woolf, that some of the characters talk about, which is the tolerableness of life. How a lot of what we do every day, the repetitiveness of our daily lives, just the mundane, getting up, making breakfast, making coffee, going to the store, how they basically function to distract us from the fact that we're going to die and the fact that we live in a meaningless universe and the suffering that we all know is inherent to being human. And writing is, it seems like by the end of the novel we're supposed to think that writing is a method of doing this, but is maybe sort of a special method of doing it. I'm not sure if that's correct, but um, I don't think we were supposed to come to any hard, fast conclusions at the end of this novel. This novel also explores the ways people respond to the death of a loved one. I'm not going to consider it a spoiler to say this, that Percival, the seventh character who we never meet, he dies in the first half of the novel in an accident. And we see the ways people cope with it. We see them cope poorly, we see them cope well. We kind of see how, when someone you love dies, how the most random things you pass by every day can remind you of them. And we also see, especially with one character, the way that when you lose a loved one, you just regret the little things you didn't do with them. One character says that at one point he told Percival that he didn't want to go to Hampton Court with him. I'm not actually sure what Hampton Court is, unfortunately. But he just keeps remembering that and just keeps regretting it. It was just a little thing, but when you lose a loved one, you do just start regretting those little things that you didn't do with them or didn't say to them. One last point I wanted to touch on in terms of the themes of the novel is I think it's possible that Virginia Woolf predicted the existentialist movement that would become popular later in the century after she died. Especially the stuff I was talking about with people's search for meaning in a meaningless universe and how a lot of our lives we spend trying to distract ourselves from the meaninglessness of the universe. That all relates a lot to the existentialism of Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus. So I thought that was interesting. I don't want to go into too much detail because, many, many YouTube videos have been made about existentialism. Overall, I thought this was a beautifully written novel. I think Virginia Woolf put the same amount of precision and attention to word choice and figurative language that a poet would put into their verse. I marvel at how every sentence, you read any sentence in this book out loud, it just rolls off so beautifully and so easily, and to just marvel at how much effort she must have put into making each of those sentences, I mean, if not perfect, then as close to perfect as a genius like Virginia Woolf could get. Overall, I really loved this novel. I think it's probably going to become my favorite by Virginia Woolf. I thought that I was was so fascinated on every page by everyone's struggle to find meaning, by the philosophical concepts that were brought up. You can basically open to any page and find a quote worthy of any blog. And I think the way it explores how people react after the death of a loved one will resonate with anyone who's lost anyone close to them, which, is something that's going to happen to everyone at some point. Unfortunately, I can't really do this novel justice in a movie review because despite the fact that it doesn't even make it to 300 pages, I feel like you could probably read nothing but this book for the rest of your life and still be finding new layers of meaning on your deathbed. Overall, I definitely recommend this book.